as they say, when you're over the target, that's when they do the most firing at you. Do you have any personal knowledge of people who have been harmed or injured in efforts to cover up or conceal these extraterrestrial technology?
Yes. Personally.
Have anyone been murdered that you would think that you know of or have heard of, I guess?
I have to be careful asking that question. I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities.
So this UFO whistleblower who's been investigating UFOs for the past 2 years at the behest of the government, when he's asked if he knows of people murdered in order to cover up the UFOs, he says, I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities. He doesn't say that during his research, 3 years actually, doing this research, he doesn't say that he didn't find any of this information. And he can't confirm it specifically because there's classification laws. He'll go to jail if he tells classified information to this hearing. So he merely has to say, I directed people with that knowledge to the appropriate authorities. So he's saying, yes, I have heard about murders to cover up this UFO nonsense. And the people who told me this, I referred them to the appropriate authorities because there's nothing he can do. He's not a policeman. He's just a UFO researcher for the government, essentially, somebody with top secret information. So now, this UFO cover-up, UFO researchers almost unanimously agree, has been happening since 1949, approximately, or 1947, which is when the Roswell crash happened. A flying saucer alien spacecraft allegedly crashed in Roswell, New Mexico, and the United States government recovered this information, and allegedly they covered it up. Right after that, a whole series of events happened that led to what most UFO researchers believe to be the first murder to cover up the existence of UFOs and alien spacecraft and alien bodies even. Who was that?
Secretary of Defense Forrestal was the first real powerful known person that was eliminated because he was going to release the information. And nobody has ever paid for that crime. That crime had never been really thoroughly investigated by forces to see what happened to him. But most people know that he was thrown out the window of the hospital and he wasn't killed by being thrown out the window, but he never got up alive.
So who is James Forrestal? James Forrestal is one of the most well-known members of President Truman's government during the 1940s. He was independently wealthy since his days as president of a Wall Street company. Forrestal was the last Secretary of the Navy and actually graced the cover of Time magazine on October 29, 1945. So he was a very well-known individual. In September of 1947, Forrestal was made America's first Secretary of Defense. Note, September of 1947. This is just 2 months after the July 1947 date for the Roswell, New Mexico crash of an alleged alien spacecraft. Okay? It is alleged that after the Roswell, New Mexico crash and recovery of the alien spacecraft and the bodies of extraterrestrials, the United States government under President Truman created a specialized secret task force to handle the question of extraterrestrials and the reverse engineering of the alien spacecraft to extract what technological benefits they could from this advanced technology. This task force was called Majestic 12, or MJ-12 for short. President Truman tasked James Forrestal with organizing Majestic 12. Now, researchers stated the first thing Secretary of Defense Forrestal did after that meeting was go to a gun store and get himself a gun. Obviously, Forrestal had reason to fear for his own safety from the mere existence of and his participation in this secret UFO task force MJ-12. Here's a colleague confirming Forrestal's paranoia on this issue.
he was talking about being erased. And I said, man, what do you mean erased? He said, yes. He said, you will be erased. I said, how do you know all this? And that's something to that effect. And he said, I know. He said, they'll go after not only you, he said, they'll go after your family. And those were his words.
With the creation of MJ-12, Majestic 12, Secretary of Defense James Forrestal objected to the secrecy around MJ-12 and the whole UFO phenomenon. He was a very idealistic man, very religious man. He was an Irish Catholic. He was actually a friend of Senator John F. Kennedy, soon to be President John F. Kennedy. We'll talk about that at the end of the video. But he's very idealistic, very religious, and he believed that the public should be told about MJ-12 and the whole UFO phenomenon. It shouldn't be secret. When he began to talk to leaders of the opposition party, the Republicans, and leaders of Congress about the alien problem and MJ-12 and aliens and all that stuff, he was asked to resign by Truman because he was violating the secrecy around MJ-12. He then Forrestal began to express his fears to many people, and he rightfully believed that he was being watched. Once he began to lay out all the secrets on MJ-12 and UFOs, they started to watch him, make sure who he was talking to. They didn't trust him anymore. So, this was interpreted by those who were ignorant of what was going on as paranoia. But if they're really out to get you, are you paranoid? You know what I mean? So Forrestal was later said to have suffered a mental breakdown, and he was admitted to Bethesda Naval Hospital in Maryland. In fact, many people believe it was feared that Forrestal would begin to talk again about MJ-12 and the UFO phenomenon, and they wanted to shut him up. So he was isolated and by being put into a mental hospital and thus discredited. He's just crazy. Ultimately, sometime in the early morning of May 22, 1949, he became one of the first victims of the UFO cover-up. I will allow Bill Cooper of the famous book of Behold, Pale White Horse. Whether you believe it or not, he lays out exactly what happened to Forrestal here, and we'll listen to him right now.
Sometime in the early morning of May 22nd, 1949, agents of the CIA tied a sheet around his neck, fastened the other end to a fixture in his room, and threw James Forrestal out the window. The sheet tore, and he plummeted to his death, and he became one of the first victims of the cover-up.
And finally, I just want to point out that James Forrestal was said to be friends with Senator Kennedy. As I mentioned earlier, they're both prominent Irish Catholics in government, well-known prominent Irish Catholics. And they actually did a tour of Berlin together in 1945. As you can see here, this is a photograph. If you look way in the background, you see John Kennedy in the sunglasses. But it's said that James Forrestal did tell Senator Kennedy about the Roswell crash and about the UFO phenomenon and recovered bodies, etc., and all about the creation of MJ-12 because they were friends. And as we looked at earlier, and it did say that he told opposition leaders and other members of Congress. And certainly as John Kennedy's good friend, he told him as well. So John Kennedy went into office 10 years later, in 1960-61, I think it was, with knowledge of MJ-12, with knowledge of the UFO phenomenon, with knowledge that they likely killed James Forrestal. Most people believe that he wanted to share this information as well, not make it secret, just like James Forrestal. And it's alleged that may have been one of the reasons that President Kennedy suffered the same fate as James Forrestal, and he was murdered or assassinated. Thanks for watching, everybody. Like, share, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. Let me know what you think. and I'll be having more videos for you very soon. Thanks for watching.